Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Have you ever noticed how exhausting it is to constantly wonder what others think of you? How every action, every word is secretly weighed against whether it will earn approval or rejection. That is the invisible prison most people live in. They wake up not as themselves, but as a reflection of what others expect them to be. But let me tell you this. The moment you stop needing validation, you unlock a power so rare that the world cannot touch it. If you want to live as your truest self, if you want to stand unshaken when the world doubts you, you must learn the art of letting go. That is why you must stay with me until the end of this speech, because once you understand this truth, you will never live the same way again. Have you noticed how much of your energy is spent chasing approval? Think carefully about it. The clothes you wear, the way you speak, the decisions you make, how many of them are truly yours and how many are crafted to satisfy the gaze of others? This is the hidden trap of validation. It disguises itself as encouragement, as belonging, as love, but in truth, it is a leash. The illusion of external approval is powerful because it convinces you that your worth lies outside of yourself, dangling in the hands of people who barely understand who you are. Imagine a performer on a stage. They give everything to win the applause of the crowd. For a moment, the clapping feels like proof of existence, a confirmation that they are enough. But when the lights fade and the seats empty, they are left alone with silence. If their worth depended entirely on that applause, what remains of them when it disappears? This is the fragility of a life built on validation. It can never stand without constant reinforcement. The illusion is cruel because it never satisfies. No matter how much praise you receive, it evaporates the moment it touches you. You are left craving more, like a thirsty traveler drinking from the sea. The approval of others cannot quench you because it was never meant to. It is external, fleeting, and conditional. And what is conditional is not real freedom. This is why so many people feel hollow despite their achievements. They may rise in status, wealth, or recognition, but if it is fueled by the hunger for validation, the hollowness remains. They are never truly alive for themselves. They are living as characters in a play written by others. Their smiles, their choices, their very sense of identity becomes a performance. And the tragedy is, the world is applauding a mask while the real person inside remains unseen. But there is a way out of this illusion, and it begins with awareness. When you pause and observe your actions, ask yourself, am I doing this because it is true to me or because I want someone to approve? That single question cuts through the fog. Suddenly, you notice how much of your life has been dictated by fear. Fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear of not being enough. And in that noticing, a door begins to open. Think about it. No one else truly knows what it feels like to be you. They can guess, they can judge, they can applaud or condemn, but they are outside of your experience. How could they possibly define your worth when they cannot even step inside your skin? The truth is, they are not evaluating you. They are projecting their own standards, their own insecurities, their own stories onto you. And you, by seeking validation, are handing them the authority to dictate your life. The illusion of external approval keeps you small because it trains you to move only within the boundaries of acceptance. You become afraid to act boldly, to live differently, to walk alone. You stay safe inside the lines of what will people think. But the paradox is that the very freedom you crave lies outside those lines. You will never feel powerful while you are begging for applause. Power begins where the need for validation ends. And here is the secret. The moment you stop chasing approval, you begin to radiate authenticity. People sense when you are no longer bending to please them. You carry yourself differently. You speak with a certain clarity. You act with a certain fearlessness. Ironically, this is when respect and admiration come to you naturally, not because you sought them, but because people are drawn to those who do not need them. It is the strength of a mountain that does not ask for recognition, yet stands immovable and admired. But do not be fooled. Letting go of validation is not about becoming cold or indifferent. It is about shifting the source of your worth. When you are no longer dependent on applause, you can actually connect with others more honestly. You no longer manipulate yourself to fit their expectations, and so what they receive from you is real. And realness, even if not always liked, is always respected. Think of the peace that comes with this shift. No longer waking up anxious about what people will say, no longer editing yourself in conversations to avoid disapproval, no longer sacrificing your own truth to maintain an image. Instead, you move through the world with a lightness, knowing that your worth is intact, regardless of whether anyone acknowledges it. That is freedom. The illusion of validation is one of the greatest chains humans carry, but it is also one of the easiest to break once you see it for what it is. The applause was never the point. The opinions of others were never the measure. There are echoes, reflections, shadows. The real measure has always been, can you live as yourself without permission? Can you look in the mirror and know that, even if the world turned away, you would still stand whole? This is the essence of power, not power over others, but power within yourself. A power that cannot be given and therefore cannot be taken away. The moment you step beyond the illusion of external approval, you enter into a strength that is steady, unshaken, and free. That is the beginning of finding true power. The search for validation is not simply about wanting approval. It is about building an identity on fragile ground. When you let others define who you are, you construct yourself out of opinions, and opinions shift like the wind. One day you are admired. The next day you are forgotten. And with each change, you are pulled in a new direction. Imagine a house built on sand. It may stand for a while, even appear beautiful, but the first storm sweeps it away. In the same way, when your sense of self rests upon the perceptions of others, you have no foundation of your own. The fragility of this identity shows itself in the smallest ways. A careless word can shatter your confidence. A raised eyebrow can make you doubt yourself. A lack of recognition can make you feel invisible. It is not because these gestures are powerful in themselves, but because you have given them power by allowing them to define you. You have surrendered your worth to the shifting tides of external approval. And so you become a mirror reflecting back the desires and judgments of those around you. Consider how many people live this way without realizing it. They are praised as children when they obey, rewarded when they fit in, and punished when they deviate. Slowly they learn that being accepted is safer than being authentic. By the time they grow, they no longer even ask, what do I truly want? Instead, they ask, what will make others approve of me? It is subtle, almost invisible, but it shapes the entire structure of their lives. The problem is that an identity built on opinions is always borrowed, never owned. If you base your sense of self on compliments, you are inflated when they come and deflated when they vanish. If you rely on reputation, you become a prisoner of how others speak about you. If you attach yourself to recognition, you cannot survive without the spotlight. In every case, your center is outside of you, vulnerable to the whims of others. And what kind of strength is that? This fragility creates endless anxiety, because if your worth depends on being liked, you must constantly manage impressions. You monitor your words, your appearance, your choices, not out of authenticity, but out of fear. You wear masks to protect yourself, but the masks become so convincing that even you forget who you are beneath them. And you do catch glimpses of your real self, you hesitate, because what if others don't approve? The cage is invisible, but it is locked from the inside. There is something within you that knows this identity is not the whole story. You feel it when you are alone and free from the gaze of others. Perhaps it appears in quiet moments when you sing to yourself, when you dance without an audience, when you write words that no one else will read. In those moments, you are not performing. You are simply being. And it feels alive, liberating, real. That is the glimpse of the self that is not fragile, because it is not built on approval. It is born from your own essence. The challenge, however, is that most people never trust that self. They think, what if I am wrong? What if others reject me? What if I am not enough? And so they go back to the safety of validation. But this safety is deceptive, for it is a safety that requires constant maintenance. You must always be vigilant, always aware of how you appear, always adjusting to keep the mask intact. It is exhausting. It is endless. When your identity depends on opinions, you are never free to rest in yourself. You are always waiting for the next evaluation. Even in success, you feel insecure because the applause might stop. Even in love, you feel uncertain because the affection might fade. The very foundation of who you believe you are is conditional. This is why people who seem strong from the outside often feel hollow within. Their strength is borrowed from the approval of others, not rooted in their own being. True strength begins when you withdraw your sense of identity from this fragile exchange. When you stop asking, who do they think I am, and start asking, who am I, even if no one is watching? That shift is terrifying at first, because it strips away the masks. But beneath the fear lies a freedom you have never tasted. The freedom to live without permission. The freedom to speak words that are true, even if they are not popular. The freedom to create not for recognition, but because creating itself fulfills you. This freedom is not fragile because it is not dependent on anything external. No amount of criticism can destroy it. No lack of attention can weaken it. No shifting opinion can alter it. It is yours alone, unshaken and whole. And the irony is, when you live from this place, you often gain more respect than ever before. People sense the difference between someone who performs for approval and someone who radiates authenticity. They are drawn to the latter, not because of performance, but because authenticity has its own undeniable power. To let go of the fragility of identity built on opinions is not to reject connection with others. It is to ground yourself so deeply in your own truth that connection becomes real, not conditional. It is to meet others not as a mask begging for applause, but as a whole being who does not need to be completed by anyone's approval. This is where strength resides, and it is from this strength that true relationships, true expression, and true power emerge. Letting go of validation is often misunderstood. Many think it means cutting themselves off from people, becoming cold, or rejecting every opinion that comes their way. But in truth, it is not about isolation. It is about freedom. It is about releasing yourself from the invisible strings that pull your every action, strings tied to the need for approval. Detachment from validation does not mean you stop caring about others. It means you stop sacrificing your truth to earn their applause. It means you finally allow yourself to exist as you are, without shrinking or stretching to fit the expectations around you. Think for a moment about the subtle ways validation controls your life. Perhaps you hold back your ideas in fear that they might sound foolish. Perhaps you dress a certain way, not because it expresses who you are, but because it makes you blend in. Perhaps you chase achievements, not because they fulfill you, but because you crave recognition. Each of these actions seems small, even normal, but together they weave a web that keeps you bound. The more you depend on approval, the tighter the web becomes, until one day you realize you are no longer living your own life. You are living for an audience. Detachment breaks that web. It gives you space to breathe. It reminds you that your worth is not something others can hand to you like a prize. Your worth is intrinsic. It was with you before the first compliment and will remain with you long after the last criticism. When you live from this truth, your choices begin to change. You stop asking, will they like this? And start asking, is this true to me? That one shift transforms everything. But letting go is not easy. The hunger for validation is addictive because for a brief moment it feels good. Praise feels like sunlight on your skin. Recognition feels like a reward for existing. Yet, the problem with this external nourishment is that it fades too quickly. What you were given today will be forgotten tomorrow, and so you go out searching for more, always chasing, never arriving. Detachment teaches you to step off this treadmill. It teaches you to find the kind of nourishment that comes from within and does not need constant replenishment from others. There is great peace in this detachment. Imagine walking into a room and not wondering how others perceive you. Imagine speaking your truth without the weight of judgment pressing down on your chest. Imagine making choices because they align with your heart, not because they fit neatly into someone else's idea of success. This is what freedom looks like. It is not arrogance. It is not arrogance. It is not defiance. It is a quiet, steady alignment with your own essence. And paradoxically, when you stop seeking validation, your presence becomes more powerful. People sense when someone is not desperate for approval. They notice the calm confidence of someone who stands grounded in their own truth. Such people carry a magnetism, not because they try to attract, but because authenticity itself is magnetic. When you let go of validation, you are no longer a mirror reflecting others' desires. You become a flame that burns with its own light. Detachment also frees you from the burden of rejection. As long as you need validation, rejection feels like death. But when you are no longer defined by others' opinions, rejection loses its sting. It becomes simply a difference of perspective, not a statement of your worth. This strength allows you to take risks, to speak boldly, to act fearlessly. You are no longer caged by the fear of not being liked, and so you are free to create, to express, to live fully. Of course, detachment requires practice. The urge for validation runs deep, carved into you since childhood. You may notice yourself reaching for approval even when you know better. But the practice is in noticing, catching yourself in the act, and gently returning to your center. Over time, the grip of validation loosens. You no longer crave it with the same intensity because you have tasted something far richer, the freedom of authenticity. And once you taste that freedom, you will not want to return. Life becomes simpler when you are no longer entangled in constant comparison. It becomes lighter when you stop carrying the burden of everyone's expectations. It becomes more joyful when you realize you are free to live as yourself, without apology, without performance, without permission. Letting go of validation is not abandonment of love or connection. In fact, it makes both more genuine. When you are no longer desperate for approval, your relationships shift. You no longer cling to people out of fear of rejection. You no longer mold yourself into what they want. Instead, you meet them as you truly are, and that authenticity allows for deeper, more honest connection. The love you give is not tainted by need, and the love you receive is not filtered through performance. It is real, because it is freely given and freely received. This is the essence of detachment. Not coldness, not withdrawal, but liberation. It is the freedom to exist without needing constant confirmation from outside yourself. It is the strength to live in alignment with your inner truth, even when others misunderstand or disapprove. And it is the discovery that when you no longer beg for approval, you step into a power that is unshakable. True power has nothing to do with control over others, with wealth, or with recognition. It does not come from how loudly you can speak or how many people agree with you. Those are illusions, shadows of strength, fragile and dependent on forces outside of yourself. Real power is born from within. It is the kind of strength that does not tremble when circumstances change, the kind of presence that does not vanish when the applause dies. To discover this inner source of power is to find something unshakable, something that remains even when the world turns its back. Look at the way most people live. They believe power lies in titles, possessions, or status. They chase approval, they hunger for recognition, they build castles of identity out of things that can be taken away. But the moment those things slip from their hands, so too does their sense of worth. This is why people who seem strong on the outside often collapse when life removes their comforts. Their strength was borrowed, not born. They relied on the external to sustain them, and the external is always temporary. The inner source of power is different. It is not built on what others give you, but on what you discover within yourself. It is the knowing that you are enough as you are, that your worth does not fluctuate with praise or criticism. This kind of power is silent, yet unyielding. It does not need to announce itself because it radiates naturally. You feel it in those who walk into a room and command respect without saying a word. They are not forcing anything. They are simply aligned with their own truth, and that alignment has gravity. To find this power, you must turn inward. It cannot be handed to you by another. It cannot be purchased, learned from books alone, or achieved through performance. It emerges when you strip away the layers of conditioning, when you stop living for appearances and return to what is essential. At first, this is frightening because you have been taught to measure yourself by external standards for so long. But when you stop clinging to those measures, you begin to notice something deeper, a quiet strength that was there all along, waiting for you to recognize it. This power comes from acceptance, not from striving. When you accept yourself as you are, without disguises or performances, you remove the cracks where doubt seeps in. You are no longer vulnerable to every opinion because you have already claimed yourself. Criticism may come, but it cannot shake you because you no longer look outward for proof of your worth. Approval may arrive, but you no longer crave it because you already feel whole. This is the paradox of inner power. The less you chase it, the more it grows. It also comes from presence. Most people are distracted, living in past regrets or future fears. Their energy is scattered, and so they feel weak. But when you return to the present moment, when you root yourself in the now, you tap into a reservoir of clarity and calm that is always available. In presence, you are not haunted by who you were or anxious about who you might become. You are simply here, alive, whole. And from that state of presence, decisions are clear, actions are firm, and power flows naturally. Another layer of this inner source of power is integrity. When your words, actions, and values align, you stop wasting energy in conflict with yourself. Most people feel drained, not because life is too heavy, but because they live divided. They say one thing and do another. They desire one path, but walk another. This internal conflict eats away at their strength. But when you act in harmony with your truth, you gain a sense of solidity. You no longer feel the need to justify yourself, because your life itself is your statement. Integrity generates power because it creates trust, trust within yourself, and trust from others. The most profound aspect of this power, however, is that it does not seek to dominate. It is not about forcing others to bend to your will. True power has no interest in control because it is already complete. It does not need conquest to feel strong. Instead, it manifests as calm confidence, as the ability to remain steady in chaos, as the courage to walk your path even when you walk alone. This is why those who discover their inner source of power often appear serene. They are not competing, not performing, not chasing. They are simply rooted in themselves. And here lies the great irony. When you no longer seek to impress others, when you no longer need to prove your strength, people recognize it more than ever. They sense the steadiness in you, the absence of neediness, the quiet assurance that cannot be faked. In a world where most people are desperate for validation, to meet someone who does not need it is extraordinary. That is why true power attracts without effort. It is not a performance, it is a presence. This inner source of power is available to you at any moment. It does not matter where you come from, what you have achieved, or how others see you. It is not given to you by the world. It is discovered by returning to yourself. Every time you choose authenticity over approval, every time you stand firm in your truth, instead of bending for acceptance. Every time you ground yourself in presence rather than fear, you strengthen this source. Over time, it becomes unshakable. When you live from this power, life changes. You are no longer swayed by every opinion. You are no longer crushed by rejection or inflated by praise. You are free, not because the world has stopped judging, but because its judgment no longer defines you. That is the essence of true power, freedom. Freedom to live, to speak, to act as yourself, unbound by the shifting tides of external validation. And once you discover it, nothing outside of you can ever take it away. Silence is often mistaken for weakness. In a world obsessed with noise, with performance, with constant displays of strength and success, silence appears passive. Yet if you look closely, silence often holds more power than the loudest voice in the room. It does not need to prove itself. It does not scramble for attention. It does not dance for approval. Silence is power precisely because it refuses to perform. It exists without needing validation, and that stillness is more commanding than any desperate attempt to be noticed. Most people live as if they are on a stage. Every gesture, every word is rehearsed for an audience they cannot even see. Social media thrives on this endless performance. Millions shouting into the void, desperate to be heard, desperate to be validated. But what if true strength lies not in how much noise you can make, but in how little you need to? Silence says, I do not require your recognition to exist. That is a power no applause can touch. Think of the times in your life when silence spoke louder than words. A person who does not respond to provocation often unsettles the one who is trying to provoke them. The aggressor expects a reaction, anger, defensiveness, submission. When none comes, their power dissolves. Or consider the moments when you withheld explanation, when you let your actions speak instead of arguing. Silence, in those cases, did what words could never do. It carried weight without effort. This is the paradox. While performance seeks validation, silence transcends it. Performance is built on insecurity. Silence is built on assurance. To perform, you must constantly monitor the reaction of others. Are they impressed? Do they approve? Are they watching? But silence has no such need. Silence is content in itself. It does not adjust, does not bend, does not beg. And because of this, it commands more respect than any frantic display. Silence is not about withdrawal from life. It is not about refusing to engage or becoming invisible. It is about the strength to choose when to speak and when not to. It is about realizing that your worth is not tied to how loudly you can announce yourself. True silence is not emptiness, it is presence. It is the energy of someone who is fully grounded, who does not waste words, who does not scatter their power in endless attempts to be noticed. There is another kind of silence too, the silence of inner stillness. The mind that constantly seeks validation is noisy, restless, always rehearsing and defending itself. It cannot sit quietly because it fears insignificance. But when you no longer crave validation, your inner world begins to quiet down. Thoughts lose their urgency, the chatter softens, and you begin to feel the depth of your own being. This silence within is the foundation of clarity. From it comes wisdom. From it comes wisdom. From it comes steadiness. From it comes true power. Consider the difference between a person who talks endlessly to fill space and a person who speaks rarely but meaningfully. The former may be entertaining, but the latter leaves an impression that lingers. Words spoken from silence carry a different weight because they are not trying to impress, they are simply true. The less you feel the need to perform, the more your presence carries substance. People begin to listen, not because you demand it, but because your silence has made your words rare and valuable. In relationships too, silence reveals its power. When you no longer perform to keep others, you give them the gift of authenticity. You are not playing a role, not trying to win their approval, not shaping yourself into their ideal. You simply are, and that stillness creates deeper connections. Performance creates masks, but silence removes them. Only in silence can real intimacy exist, because only in silence are you truly yourself. But do not mistake silence for passivity or submission. Silence is not about being weak in the face of challenge. On the contrary, it often takes more strength to remain silent than to react. Anyone can lash out, anyone can perform, anyone can scramble for attention. It takes discipline, confidence, and inner security to remain still, to trust that you do not need to prove yourself in every moment. That is why silence unsettles those who depend on reaction. It denies them control. The deepest form of silence, however, is not directed at others. It is directed at yourself. It is the silence that comes when you stop arguing with who you are, when you stop fighting for validation, when you stop performing to earn a place in the world. In that silence, you begin to realize that you were whole all along. You do not need to prove your worth through endless noise. You can simply live, and in living authentically, you carry more power than performance could ever give. Silence does not reject sound. When you speak from silence, your words carry authority. When you act from silence, your movements carry purpose. Silence does not erase expression. It purifies it. It filters out the noise of insecurity, leaving only what is true. That is why silence often has the last word. In the end, the loudest voices fade, the performances are forgotten, but silence remains. It endures because it was never dependent on validation to begin with. You do not need to perform to be powerful. You do not need to announce yourself to be real. You do not need applause to prove your worth. True power is revealed in silence, in the calm refusal to beg for recognition, in the steady presence that needs no validation, in the quiet assurance that your being is enough. And when you learn to trust that silence, you discover a strength that no amount of performance could ever give you. The greatest misunderstanding people carry about validation is that it seems harmless, even necessary. From childhood, you are conditioned to seek approval. Parents clap when you walk, teachers praise when you answer correctly, society applauds when you meet its standards. On the surface, it feels encouraging, but deep down, it plants a seed. The belief that your worth must always be measured through someone else's eyes. You begin to chase applause, likes, compliments, recognition, as though without them you somehow cease to exist. This is the trap of external validation, and it is far more subtle and destructive than it appears. It becomes a prison where you willingly hand the key to others, waiting for them to open the door and tell you that you are enough. Validation is like a drug. At first, a little seems harmless. It feels good, it soothes insecurity, it gives you a temporary high. But soon, the doses must increase. One compliment isn't enough. You crave constant reassurance. One achievement is not satisfying. You need the next and the next. The approval that once felt sweet starts to enslave you. You lose the ability to stand firm without applause, to believe in yourself without praise. And the most dangerous part is this. You become blind to the fact that your entire life is now shaped not by what you want, but by what will get you approval. Think about how many decisions are not truly yours. The clothes you wear, the words you speak, the path you pursue, often are not chosen out of inner conviction, but out of fear of judgment. You become a performer on a stage, rehearsing lines that will earn applause rather than speaking from truth. This is why so many people feel empty, even when admired. They are celebrated for a mask, not for who they really are. Validation becomes a currency, and you trade your authenticity to earn it. But here is the irony. No amount of external approval ever satisfies the hunger it creates. Validation is a bottomless pit, and each time you fill it, it swallows more. If 10 people praise you, you wonder why the 11th didn't. If one criticizes you, it erases the 1,000 compliments before it. You become fragile, reactive, always chasing the next fix. And yet, the more you chase it, the weaker you feel. Your power, your stability, your self-trust, they all crumble because you have outsourced them to the opinions of others. The danger of external validation is not only in the endless chase, but in the silence it creates within you. When you live for approval, you stop listening to your own voice. You dismiss intuition, ignore inner wisdom, and abandon your natural rhythm. You might even succeed in impressing others, but at the cost of betraying yourself. That betrayal is subtle but heavy. It weighs on your soul until you feel lost, unsure of who you really are beneath the layers of performance. And the cruel truth is, the crowd you are trying to impress is fickle. Opinions change like the wind, and the same people who praise you today may mock you tomorrow. If your identity depends on their shifting approval, your sense of self will rise and fall like a fragile leaf tossed in the storm. This is why external validation is not just dangerous, it is unsustainable. It builds your house on sand, and the moment the tide shifts, everything collapses. The world conditions you to believe that approval equals love, but they are not the same. True love, whether for yourself or from others, does not demand performance. It does not vanish when you fail or change. But validation is shallow. It feeds the surface while starving the soul. And when you trade real connection for applause, you find yourself surrounded by noise, yet feeling utterly alone. The danger, then, is not simply that validation weakens you. The danger is that it distracts you from discovering your real power. As long as you are busy chasing approval, you never stop to realize that you are already whole before anyone clapped, that your voice, your path, your existence need no external permission to be valid. The constant pursuit of validation blinds you to the fact that freedom was always yours. Pause and reflect. Whose applause are you chasing? Whose opinion holds your freedom hostage? When did you start believing that their recognition mattered more than your truth? See how this chase has drained you, how it has forced you to live as a shadow instead of a light. The moment you recognize this, you begin to see the danger clearly, that external validation is not a gift, but a trap. And awareness is the first crack in its walls. Once you see the prison, you can choose to walk out. The moment you realize that external validation is a trap, the question becomes, what then? If you are no longer chasing applause, where do you turn? The answer lies not outside, but within. The shift from seeking validation to building inner confidence is perhaps the most transformative step you can take in reclaiming your power. It is the point where the chains fall and you begin to live from a place that is unshakable because it no longer depends on others. Inner confidence is not arrogance, nor is it the loud proclamation of superiority. It is quiet, steady, and deeply rooted. It comes from knowing who you are, not from being told who you are. It is a flame that does not need fuel from the outside world because its source is infinite. It burns from your own being. Unlike validation, which flickers and fades depending on who claps or who criticizes, inner confidence does not waver. It remains steady through praise and insult alike. But building it is not easy because it requires unlearning years of conditioning. From childhood, you were taught to measure yourself against others. Grades, trophies, beauty, money, social approval. To shift away from validation, you must stop playing a game you were trained to play your whole life. That can feel uncomfortable, even frightening, because validation has been your compass. Without it, you may feel lost at first, as though you have no map. Yet, this is where the real discovery begins. For the first time, you learn to navigate using your own inner compass rather than borrowed ones. The first step in this shift is learning to listen. Beneath the noise of opinions, judgments, and expectations, there is a voice within you, a calm, quiet knowing. You may have ignored it for years, but it never left. It is the voice that tells you when something feels wrong, even if others approve. It is the voice that sparks excitement when you move toward what is truly yours. Building inner confidence is about reconnecting to this voice and trusting it above the applause of the crowd. This trust grows through action. Each time you choose to follow your truth instead of chasing approval, you build a deeper foundation. At first, it may feel risky. People might disapprove. They might laugh. They might criticize. But when you see that you can survive their judgment, you realize something profound. Their opinion has no power unless you give it power. And each time you stand firm, your confidence grows stronger, not because someone told you that you are strong, but because you proved it to yourself. Confidence built this way is unshakable because it is self-sustained. You no longer need constant reassurance. You do not crumble when rejected, nor do you inflate when praised. Both become just passing winds that do not disturb the stillness of your center. This is true freedom to walk through the world with your head high, not because everyone admires you, but because you know yourself. The shift also changes the way you experience success and failure. When you live for validation, success is defined by recognition, and failure feels like death. But when your confidence comes from within, success is simply alignment with your truth, and failure becomes feedback, a lesson, not a verdict. You stop fearing mistakes because your worth is no longer tied to perfection. Instead, you embrace growth, knowing that every step, even the missteps, strengthens you. And perhaps most importantly, inner confidence allows you to live authentically. You no longer wear masks, no longer twist yourself into shapes to please others. You speak your truth, pursue what matters to you, and stand by your values, even when unpopular. This authenticity not only liberates you, but also attracts others who resonate with your real self. Ironically, when you stop seeking validation, you begin to draw genuine respect and connection, because people sense the power of someone who is rooted in themselves. But the true gift of this shift is the peace it brings. The endless chase for approval is exhausting. It drains your spirit and scatters your energy. When you stop chasing and start standing within yourself, life becomes lighter. You no longer need to prove, to perform, to beg for recognition. You can simply be. And in that being, you discover the quiet joy of freedom, the joy of knowing that nothing and no one can take away your worth. This is the path from weakness to strength, from slavery to freedom. External validation will always tempt you. The world will always try to pull you back into its game. But the more you practice listening inward, the stronger your confidence becomes until it becomes second nature. And then no applause can inflate you, no insult can deflate you. You walk your path with steady steps, not because the world approves, but because you approve. That is true power. The ultimate freedom does not come from wealth, status, or recognition. It does not arrive when the crowd finally claps for you or when the world bows to your achievements. True freedom begins when you no longer need anyone's applause to feel whole. It is the quiet, unshakable power of living authentically, of standing in your own truth without asking for permission. It is the moment you realize that the chains that held you were never locked. They were illusions woven from your own fear of rejection. Living authentically means you are no longer a mirror reflecting the expectations of others, but a light radiating from within. Most people live like mirrors. They shape themselves based on what others want to see, adjusting constantly, terrified of breaking the image. This makes life fragile, because one crack in that image feels like collapse. But when you live authentically, you are no longer fragile. You are not an image, not a performance, not a collection of masks. You are simply yourself, and nothing is more liberating than that. But what does it mean to live authentically? It is not about being rebellious for the sake of rebellion, nor about rejecting every opinion that comes your way. It is about alignment. It is about living in such a way that your actions, words, and choices arise from your core values and not from the fear of judgment. It is about pursuing paths that ignite your spirit, even if they do not earn applause. It is about saying no when you mean no, and yes when you mean yes, without coating your truth in layers of pretense. This freedom is powerful because it untangles you from the endless game of comparison. When you live for validation, your eyes are always on others, measuring, competing, envying. You are never at rest because there is always someone who seems better, someone who outshines you, someone whose recognition you crave. But authenticity ends this game. When you live true to yourself, there is no competition because no one else can live your life. You are not trying to be better than anyone. You are simply being fully yourself. That is incomparable. There is also a deep peace that comes with this way of living. The constant noise of opinions fades into the background because they no longer define you. Whether people praise or criticize, you remain the same. Praise does not inflate you, and criticism does not deflate you. Both pass by like weather patterns while you remain grounded. Imagine the strength of walking through life with this steadiness, where no storm can uproot you because your roots go deeper than the surface. That is the essence of true freedom. This freedom also transforms your relationships. When you are no longer desperate for validation, you no longer cling to people who withhold it. You stop twisting yourself into shapes to earn their approval, and you stop fearing their rejection. Instead, you attract relationships built on truth, not performance. People who value the real you, not the mask, and you in turn begin to love others in a freer way, because you are no longer using them as mirrors for your worth. Love becomes cleaner, deeper, more genuine. But the beauty of living authentically is not only in relationships or inner peace, it is in creativity, expression, and growth. When you are no longer imprisoned by opinions, you are free to create without fear, to try without needing permission, to fail without shame. This is where true innovation and originality are born. Think about it. The people who truly change the world are not those who conform to the approval of the crowd, but those who dared to live and speak from their own truth, even when the world mocked them. Authenticity is not only personal freedom, it is also the birthplace of greatness. Living this way requires courage. It is not easy to stand firm when the crowd disagrees. It is not easy to remain calm when criticized, or to continue on your path when others laugh. But courage is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to live truthfully despite it. And each time you choose authenticity over approval, you build a deeper well of strength until one day it becomes natural. In this freedom, life stops being a performance and starts being an experience. You no longer rush to prove yourself. You begin to savor the journey. Success becomes sweeter because it is yours, not because others recognize it. Failure loses its sting because it does not define you. Even solitude feels rich because you are no longer lonely when you are alone. You are whole within yourself. This is the ultimate power. The ability to stand in your truth, unshaken by the noise of the world. To wake each day not asking, will they approve of me, but declaring, I approve of myself. When you reach this point, you are untouchable, not because you dominate others, but because no one can dominate you. You are free, and freedom is the purest form of power. So let go of validation, not as a rejection of the world, but as an embrace of your own being. Live authentically, not because it is easy, but because it is real. In that reality lies the kind of strength no applause can give, and no criticism can take away. That is where true power begins, and once you find it, nothing and no one can take it from you. And so, the journey comes full circle. You began by chasing validation, believing that applause was proof of your worth. But along the way, you discovered that the chase was endless, that every compliment faded, every approval left you hungry again. You saw the trap for what it was, a prison disguised as praise. The real breakthrough is not in rejecting others, but in reclaiming yourself. When you stop seeking validation, you begin to hear the quiet voice within, the voice that has always known your truth. You realize that confidence is not granted by others, but built by standing firmly in who you are. From this strength arises authenticity, and with authenticity comes freedom. The freedom to live without masks, to love without fear, to create without permission. That is true power, to walk the world unshaken, unchained, unafraid, because your worth is no longer up for negotiation. When you let go of validation, you no longer live as a reflection. You live as light.